Last week I heard a story about a doctor at a medical missions conference. And he was talking about research he'd been doing over the last 30 years. And he's been trying to make connections between spiritual health and physical health. This is a medical doctor. And so he asks patients, when he does a health history on them, and he asks them a spiritual history as well. So questions, he's been asking people questions like, do you have a relationship with God? Do you have some sort of religious community? Do you have connections within that community? And he's been doing this, and he reported his findings on the connections there at this medical conference and the connections between those. The thing is that there's nothing new between those connections. The book of Proverbs, over 3,000 years ago, made connections between spiritual health and physical health. And you can check that out in chapter 14, verse 30, the connection between physical and spiritual health. That's what we're talking about today, is the book of Proverbs. And it's a collection of lots of proverbs that are compiled to teach and to showcase wisdom. The author in the very beginning tells you why it's been put together. It says these are the Proverbs of Solomon. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives, to help them do what is right, just, and fair. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. And by the way, if you haven't read Proverbs ever before in the New Living Translation, I recommend it. It's different. It opens up very common, practical sort of reading type of language. It just makes it really simple and easy to read. And that's what anything up here today will be in the New Living. We know that King Solomon wrote most of them. We learn in 1 Kings 4:32 that he wrote over 3,000 Proverbs. God gave him, of course, more wisdom than any other king ever had. And he wrote 3,000 Proverbs. Well, in this collection, we've got about 950 verses. And that's just a sampling, just a tip of the iceberg. In other words, some of them are attributed to other people, not Solomon. And so obviously we can't cover everything that the Proverbs talk about in one lesson. There's topics all over the place. And it's a collection compiled together from a couple of different sources. And the Hebrew root for Proverbs is to be like. That's what the Hebrew word for proverb is to be like. So comparisons, like this, like that, what we call similes now today. And you see that in Proverbs. You read the Proverbs, this is like that, or this is not like that. Comparison. So this is a carefully edited anthology. Some collected later on by Hezekiah, by King Hezekiah. Some put together by scribes later on, and all compiled together. And we can pull them apart individually and look at individual proverbs and see what they have to say. But there's also a context and some themes that go throughout the whole book. And there's a lot to say in very practical, common sense ways about the book of Proverbs. It's poetry. It's parallelism is what it's called, and we'll see tons of parallelism poetry in the next several weeks as we look through the book of Psalms. Parallelism is Hebrew form, where they say one thing in different ways. You can see it best in this verse in Proverbs. As the beating of cream yields butter, the striking the nose causes bleeding, so stirring up anger causes quarrels. And you see that poetic. You can really see the poetic form in that verse. The beating, the striking, the stirring up, and how they're making a point poetically there. There's also parallels of these proverbs in Egyptian and Mesopotamian proverbs. But the fact that they come from somewhere else, maybe, that they don't originate with Solomon, doesn't make them untrue, or doesn't make them uninspired, because they've got these also in ancient records in other cultures, some of the same proverbs, some of the same things being said. What it does say is that the search for wisdom, which is part of what Proverbs is about, is a multi-ethnic, multicultural, international search by one God who brings it all together. That this is not something limited to one group of people. And you really see that when you look at the history of it. Well, here's how the collection of Proverbs is laid out. You've got a prologue, somewhat of a prologue. Call it in college terminology, Wisdom 101. In chapters 1 through 9, you've got this sort of introduction to wisdom and a way to interpret the rest of the collection. It must be done through God's eyes. And you could take one proverb, and it's very secular, very, very practical in its terminology, but it's got to be viewed through godly wisdom. And so in this prologue, you've got two women. You've got Lady Wisdom, who's held up as beautiful and virtuous. And then you've got Mistress Folly, who is the loose, unfaithful woman. And so you got kind of representing of two people. Godly search for wisdom and this folly, immoral woman over here. And you, right away you get that the search for wisdom, the wisdom is the fear of the Lord. But it's not just a reverence and an awe for God, which is part of it. It's also a reliance on Him. A reliance on Him and an avoidance of evil and a lifelong search and process of observation and instruction. That's where this comes from. And so then, in chapters 10 through 29, you've got the main book of the collections of Proverbs. So in college terms, it's advanced wisdom, right? It's the next level, advanced wisdom. And you've got all of these different practical applications, some of which we'll look at. Several are repeated, either partially or fully. And so you see these like in the ones that have there, chapter 13, 14, and 14:27. You can look at them later on. And in fact, throughout this lesson, I'll put lots of ones up there. I recommend go look at them after this, for further study on the themes we'll talk about. Go and check them out and just compare the different ones. So you've got the main body, and then you've got the epilogue, chapter 30 and 31. And this kind of brings it together. You notice in chapter 30 and 31, it says it's from two guys, Agur and Lemuel, two, we don't know, kings, wise men. There's no biblical context for these guys. There's no non-biblical context for these guys. Don't really know who they are. They may have been wise men from the east, wise men from another area, and they've compiled these. But when you look at them, they're sort of a summary of wise behavior, culminating in chapter 31, the ideal wife. So wisdom, again, given a humane face, just like in the beginning. Sort of bookending, that lady wisdom, beautiful and virtuous, and then at the end, the ideal wife humanized as wisdom. And so this is what you've got in the book of Proverbs. And you can kind of see that in those two verses in chapter 9 and chapter 30. Kind of similar language, the way it's written. Proverbs is a topic searcher's dream. You want to look about something up in the Bible, you more likely will find something in Proverbs. I want to look on something on laziness. I want to see what the Bible says about money. I want to see, and Proverbs will most likely come up as at least something you'll find there in the Bible. And so again, we can't cover it all in one lesson. It's all over the place, but we got to remember that, like the Pirate's Code, right? Know what I'm talking about when I say the Pirate's Code, seeing Pirates of the Caribbean? Like the Pirate's Code, it's more like guidelines. All right? They're not firm, hard, fast rules. There's exceptions to these things. You can't look at the Proverbs and go, well, that's always going to be true, because there's exceptions. There are guidelines for general things in life. Some of the Proverbs state the obvious. An honest witness tells the truth. A false witness tells lies. Well, duh. That's what a lie is. It's false. So remember, general things. Some of them you have to use a little bit more discernment in order to interpret them. Like chapter 26, don't answer the foolish arguments of fools, or you will become as foolish as they are. Be sure to answer the foolish arguments of fools, or they will become wise in their own estimation. Well, wait a minute. Do I answer them or do I not answer them? What am I supposed to tell me what I'm supposed to do here, because this is a hard and fast rule? Well, should I answer these people? You got to use discernment. I mean, the point is that you use discernment in applying these rules. Well, sometimes it's good to answer them. Sometimes you got to be a little bit more withholding in what you say. And so you got to use discernment here. Boy, there are some that I'm really glad are not firm and hard rules. Some, like this one, says wise words come from the lips of people with understanding, but those lacking sense will be beaten with a rod. Well, how many times have we shoved our foot in our mouth? Shoved foot in mouth. Have we ever been beaten with a rod? I'm glad it's not her, because he's been beaten with a rod. I'm glad that we have not put this as a rule. These are sort of general rules for life. And then you've got this little nugget. A bowl of vegetables with someone you love is better than steak with someone you hate. When I know what this is saying, people and the type of people that you want to be with, I'm telling you right now, if somebody wants to bring me to Ruth's Chris and give me a filet mignon or a ribeye, and if it's the leader of ISIS, I'm going to eat the steak for free, and I'm going to enjoy it. Now, I might get pat downs from the TSA for the rest of my life, but I'm going to enjoy the steak no matter who it comes from. Now, of course, I know that's not what it's talking about here. But again, it's those rules of life. And of course, we've got the ones like train up a child in the way he should go, and when they're old, they won't go. Okay, now, again, that's a hard and fast rule, but we all know here that you can't program children to do exactly what you want them to do, and they're going to do it all the time, and take into account their mistakes, your mistakes, what we do wrong. We know that's not a rule that's always going to happen. It's a general rule of life. And then, of course, one of my favorite ones too is flipping a coin can end our arguments. It settles disputes between powerful opponents. So Proverbs' wise way of settling disputes. Flipping a coin. Of course, the literal here is casting lots, but in our modern terminology, flipping coins, or it's right, it's rock, scissors, paper, shoot, right? End an argument. Very common sense kind of stuff. So you've got this stuff, and it's all over the place. Proverbs all over the place. But there are some themes. There are some recurring themes that keep popping back up over and over again through the collections, and so we're going to look at a few of those. Beginning with living life with others. Proverbs is sort of like the first eHarmony that ever existed. It puts mates together, and I don't just mean mates in the spousal sense. Mates is in the down under sense. You know, Australia, mates, you're my mate, right? So we're going to look at a little bit with spouses. Besides the famous and detailed look at a wife in chapter 31, which we mentioned sort of the humane look at what wisdom is, and we know that. We know that chapter where it exudes all these characteristics that you want to look for in a wife. Besides that, you've also got this in which we learn that hopefully any married person has already figured out it's better to live alone in the desert than with a quarrelsome, complaining wife. A quarrelsome wife is as annoying as a constant dripping on a rainy day. And I hope if you're a husband, you figured that out. And as a wife, you figure that out. And I want you to say this constant dripping on a rainy day, I envision the Chinese water torture. You know? Over and over again. And so this concept of characteristics of what we look for in spouses and what we look for in good marriages, this may be the reason why so many early Christian men decided to go out and live as monks in the desert. That's where they lived, out in the desert, away from everybody. Maybe because they had quarrelsome, complaining wives, right? I don't know. But Proverbs, general rules for life. More space, though, than on spouses is spent on friends. A lot more space on friends. So there's a few things that Proverbs tells us about friends. Friends are constant and unconditional. They are loyal. There are friends who destroy each other, but a real friend sticks closer than a brother. And then you learn as you read all these verses, and I'll put all these other verses on friendship up here. You can go back and look at them later on. But it tells you that they always have your back. That they love you enough to be open and honest with you. That they give you constructive criticism. All right? Constructive criticism. That they're willing to tell you sometimes things you don't want to hear. That they give you the advice and the counsel, but they also know when to leave you alone. When to give you your space, or when to give you a hug. And this is all stuff in Proverbs. Go read the verses. I'm not just making this up as I'm talking. They tell you that, they know when it's time to leave. I've worn out my welcome, time to pack and go. That friends know that really to be a friend means to give ahead of themselves. That sometimes the other person shouldn't be the one to make the first move. I have to be the one to make the first move. All of this about friends in the book of Proverbs, that they're constant, they're unconditional, and that they know what it means to be a good friend and to be there for you. So friends. Another theme we see throughout the book is godly economics, wealth and poverty, godly economic policy. Help me never to tell a lie. Second, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, who is the Lord? And if I'm too poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name. So wise economics in God's view is balance. Right? Good search of balance. And how do you secure this balance? And you look at what else it says about wealth and poverty. Part of it is a concern for the poor, which is all throughout Proverbs, but not just in Proverbs. We see that as well in other books of the Bible. God's business plan is concerning the poor. It includes concern for the poor. You can't get any better. The godly care about the rights of the poor. The wicked don't care at all. God would have been a fan of Robin Hood. I'm convinced he would have been a fan of Robin Hood. He's stealing from the rich, wealthy, living up in the castle, getting all the luxuries, while the people out there in Sherwood Forest are living out in poverty, trying to scrape by with little pittance. He would have been a fan of Robin Hood. And throughout the book of Proverbs, the idea is repeated that too much wealth brings disaster. That striving for wealth is just something that is not in God's plans. That when you loan stuff to the poor, you're loaning stuff to God. That wealth is only temporary. It just disappears. The idea that we should minimize our debt and stick to a budget. Read Proverbs. You get this concept of minimizing our debt and sticking to a budget. Planning. Economic planning. But godly economics also involves more than just the practical things. It involves our attitude behind it. And so all the concepts of honesty. Honesty in our business dealings, honesty in our negotiations. All of this is godly economics that you find in Proverbs. And then, of course, there's tons about laziness. You look up, just type in laziness in a search engine for Bibles, like 18 references in the book of Proverbs about laziness. And a lot of it relates to business. Making money, not making money, being able to support yourself, laziness. All culminating in the epilogue in the ideal wife who works hard and is not lazy. So all of this godly economics that you find weave throughout the collection of Proverbs. And then the third theme in the collections is how words are used. We'll call it communications theory. Kind of going with the college, communication theory. The tongue can bring death or life. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences. And we've talked about this a little bit before, that words can hurt. Words can hurt a lot. And I'm convinced whoever did that phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, the words will never hurt me, they were an idiot. They were a fool. They were what Proverbs would have called a fool. Because we all know that people have said things to us, and we've said things to others that have wounded us, going straight to our heart like an arrow, and has stuck with us, maybe our entire lives. Words are powerful. Words can hurt, words can heal, words can bring evil, words can bring good. This is all in Proverbs. Words can destroy self-esteem, they can lift up and encourage confidence. They are powerful things. But Proverbs also says, even though they're powerful, sometimes mere words are not enough. That it's the deeds that have to take place as well. You have to do more than just talk. Satan knows this too. Satan knows that words are powerful. Some of the words he uses to get to us, and some of the times that he uses us to use words to get to others, words are powerful things. And at their best, Proverbs tells us words are honest, words are appropriate, and words are few. We speak little, not a lot. And I'm convinced that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth as a biological and visual reminder to listen more and speak less. The book of Proverbs tells us all this stuff about words. But the one thing tells us is that the word is the most powerful word. And like the rest of the Bible, Proverbs points to the living word of God. Look at this verse. Who but God goes up to heaven and comes back down? Who holds the wind in his fist? Who wraps up the oceans in his cloak? Who has created the whole wide world? What is his name and his son's name? Tell me if you know. This is the guy Agur, who we don't know. And he's somehow searching for God and his name, and whether he does it knowingly or unknowingly, is somehow looking forward to the time of God's Son. Looking forward to the coming of God's Son. And as we walk through the Bible, which is what we've been doing, we got to remember that the main purpose of this book, not just the book of Proverbs, the main book of the whole purpose of the whole book, is to point people to Jesus. To point people back up to God through Jesus so we can develop a relationship with God through his Son. And so that's more than just about following the instructions and following the rules and getting it all right. The bigger point of it all is to come through Jesus and to love him and to love each other more. It's a bigger point of the whole of Scripture. Next week we're going to start looking at the book of Psalms. And we're going to spend 5 weeks on the book of Psalms. There's a lot of Psalms, 150 Psalms. Going through Advent, up until Christmas, spending time looking at Psalms. So just in preparation for that, if you love the Psalms, some people are huge fans of the book of Psalms, and you'll like our time spent till Christmas. If you don't think it's all old poetry, sorry, you have to just endure for a few weeks. there are a lot of life lessons in the book of Proverbs, and I encourage you, go and look at some of the verses that I put up there and kind of compare and see if it doesn't hold up to some of your own life experiences. A lot of times in the book of Proverbs, you go and you read it and you think, oh yeah, I get that. It's true. But the common thread through the whole book, we've looked at some themes, looked at some little things, but the common thread through the whole thing is that we're creatures of a Creator. And that the big main point is to trust in that Creator for reliance on Him, for guidance, and for wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's how it all starts. And there's no room for arrogance in that. To remember that God is God and I am not. And that God invites us, as His creation, to know Him more and to learn how to love Him more and to learn what it means to love others. But that's the whole of it. And that's what He invites us to do. He invites us now, as we stand and sing, to learn to love Him and to love others.